going to go through 3 weeks of Copper Scroll, and I'm going to explain this a little bit, the Dead Sea Scrolls, because this is something I'm sure most of you, maybe a lot of you, have never ever heard of. What is he talking about? The Copper Scroll. And so we're going to have three 40-minute videos, which will be a study, and plus I'll add a little bit else to it too. And this kind of does fit in with our study on the temple. So we'll go ahead and get this started. But first, what I'm going to do is give you a little introduction, just to have an idea of what we're talking about when we say the Copper Scroll. There's the Dead Sea Scrolls, which obviously means they come from around the area of the Dead Seas. So here's the Dead Sea. You see the upper left there, that's Jerusalem. The Dead Sea is going to come alive again, as we know during the Millennial Kingdom. Right now it's salt. You can't sink in there. If you try to float in there, it's I forget what percentage is, but it's like 30% salt or something like that. And so, but it's going to come back to life again. And we know that the river is going to flow from the temple, and there's going to be fish in there and so on. But right now it's pretty dead. The lake way above that is Lake Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee, okay? So, and it's connected by the Jordan River. But anyways, this is where they found these Dead Sea Scrolls back in, I think most of them in the 40s, then some more later 50s and so on. But there's 7 main places. Now the one I heard of only is the Qumran Caves, but they've got 7 main places there where they found these Dead Sea Scrolls around the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. It's a very dry place. So this is what it looks like. Caves. Now if I was a kid, that'd be a lot of fun. Wouldn't we go crawl around these caves and stuff? But anyways, a Boydwan, is this Boydwan? Young Boydwan shepherd boy threw a Bedouin rock up in the cave, and it hit something. He heard it shatter, so then they went up, that's how originally they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, back in, I think, somewhere in the 40s. I can't remember the exact date. But anyways, some of these scrolls, kind of bad shape. They had to get to take these and open them up and clean them up, but it took a little bit of scientific skill. But they were preserved pretty good because it's a dry, arid area. It was pretty dry there, so they didn't deteriorate like most stuff would. So these are from 300 BC, 2,000 years old, and they still got the information out, which is pretty cool, isn't it? And so this is what one of the a scroll looks like when they unfold it, they get it out. It's really not too bad, so they can decipher it and say, okay, this is what they wrote. Now the book of Isaiah is complete, as they have found in one of the scrolls. But here's what the Copper Scroll looks like. It's on copper, and so copper is a lot more durable over that time. Now how they did this, they had to thin out that copper and then engrave on it. It was a lot different than you and I use in our computers, isn't it, to think of how they did this. But it's kind of cool when you think about it. But anyways, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a collection of thousands of millennia-old scrolls, scraps, and fragments from ancient Jewish and Hebrew religious manuscripts with great historical, religious, and linguistic significance. So it's not all just scrolls about books of the Bible. There's all kinds of scrolls that they found of all their history and so on. And discovered in caves in the Dead Sea region, these antiquities date back to as early as the 3rd century BC. In total, over 950 manuscripts have been uncovered to date. I think with scraps, they said around 1,500 or more, so it's a lot. The documents, which are made from a variety of materials, including animal skin, papyrus. Papyrus is reeds that they kind of glue together. A reed that they get from the water. They take it out and they use it it's like paper almost, but it deteriorates a lot faster. Animal skins last a lot longer. And copper obviously lasts longer yet. Have amazed people around the world with their well-prepared condition. Due to the lack of humidity and aridness of the Judean desert, the artifacts were able to survive for thousands of years. Among the manuscripts found, the book of Isaiah has proven to be the most prominent. It is the only manuscript preserved in its entirety, and the content of the document aligns with the messianic beliefs of the sectarians. I think it's the same as what we have today. Basically, it came from the Masoretic text, if you translate it from Hebrew to English, or even from Greek to English. I think some of these scrolls that were on Greek. But in March 16, 2021, archaeologists uncovered the first scroll fragments in over 60 years. The remains have been identified as having come from a larger scroll found in the same cave in the 1950s. The specific cave containing these scrolls is called the Cave of Horror, named for the remains of the Jewish refugees unearthed the first time the cave was evacuated. So they found a bunch of skeleton bones in there. With new drone technology, the Israel Antiquities Authority is hopeful that it can uncover even more artifacts. So that's kind of a little bit on brief outline of that, but let me go ahead and start this video.
Today on In Grace, we're going to talk about temple treasures and the Copper Scroll. Stay tuned. Ever since I was a boy, I've been fascinated with God's creation. I'm traveling the planet to tell His story about His world. I'm Jim Scudder Jr. Come with me on another exciting adventure in Grace. Welcome to In Grace. I'm Jim Scudder Jr. We try to bring you adventure, and I don't think of any greater adventure than what we're going to bring you today. We're going to tell you the story of the Copper Scroll, found with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the area near Qumran in Israel. And there's a man we're going to tell you about. His name is Jim Barfield. He is a retired firefighter and an arson investigator from Oklahoma, had never been to Israel, and yet he may have deciphered one of the greatest treasure maps in the history of the world. We're going to introduce you to him and his story, his journey, and the author of the book about him, Shelley Neese. This is going to be a treasure hunt today on In Grace. Our adventure began when I got a Facebook message from the author of a new book called The Copper Scroll Project. I'd heard of the story. A retired arson investigator from Oklahoma named Jim Barfield believes he's located a massive treasure buried in Qumran. Well, at first, I dismissed the message since it all seemed so far-fetched. But just to be sure, I asked an archaeologist friend about this, and he said that he wasn't sure about the treasure, but he did know that Shelley Neese was the real deal. So I replied to her. I asked her for her book. A few days later, it arrived, and she had signed the book with Hosea 2:15. As I read the book and studied the scriptures, this far-fetched story started to get closer and closer. My film crew and I decided to fly from Chicago to Washington, D.C. to talk to Shelley at the impressive Museum of the Bible. The museum just so happened to have a replica of the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll?
This is it? Well,
Yeah.
This is the replica.
Well, this is,
This is as good as you're going to get if you're not in Jordan.
This is cool because obviously it's a replica, but this is a treasure map.
Exactly. So the way it looks right now, the actual Copper Scroll is cut into 23 strips now. It did what copper does. It oxidized, so you can see that it's the color of the Statue of Liberty, really. It doesn't rust the same way at other metals. It oxidizes, and so that's a protective layer for it. I'm no metallurgist, but from what I understand, copper was the perfect metal to be able to use for something that's going to last 2,000 years. The Copper Scroll is 99% pure copper, which is the reason it could be rolled. If it had been any more percentage tin, it wouldn't have been able to roll like it did. So it took 3 years for the Dead Sea Scroll editorial team to find someone to open it. I mean, who wants to have that job? Who wants to be able to unroll this 2,000-year-old manuscript and it potentially crumble at your fingertips?
In those 3 years, though, they could see some of the writing on the outside, and they were
Exactly.
reading words like gold and dig, and so they started to have an inkling of the significance of this.
Right. Because it's not a papyrus document or a leather document, when it was even just sitting in 2 rolls in the museum in Amman, Jordan, it was a professor from Germany who was looking at it closely under a microscope and realized that these same words were repeating themselves over and over, which is not what anyone had expected. I don't think that he had a complete idea of, that it would be written in 12 columns with 60 plus locations of buried treasure, but he certainly understood that these are treasure map words. And that was the first person to be able to realize the significance of what they were looking at.
What could be there? According to the Copper Scroll, what is hidden?
All Dead Sea Scroll scholars would agree that the amount of treasure listed in the Copper Scroll is so copious, it's so much that there's nowhere else in Israel or really in antiquity that would have had access to that kind of wealth other than the Jewish temple.
Temple treasury.
Exactly. In the First Temple period, we know from the Bible that silver was as common as stones. We know that during the Second Temple period in Herod's temple, Josephus writes that even just the way the Romans raided that treasury, that so much gold flooded the market that it affected the global value for gold. And the temple treasury had been raided in previous times. It was clearly a targeted point because all Jews were required to tithe to the temple. I mean, just like as Christians we're supposed to tithe. I mean, this was a practice that was, but they were all over the diaspora sending in their tithes to the temple. Those tithes were only allowed to be used for temple services, so they were sanctified. And so sometimes that wealth would accrue. And the Jews knew that the Babylonians were coming. They knew that the Romans were coming. I mean, this didn't catch them totally off guard. So there was time in both of those scenarios to be able to secure the treasury. The idea that a group of Essenes in the Second Temple period, that a group of followers of Jeremiah in the First Temple period, this idea that someone with priestly access could have secreted away temple treasures is not a leap of logic. We know that there's a tunneling system under Jerusalem. There's ways to get these things out of the old city and hide them. I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls might be evidence of that themselves. There's some theories that think that the Dead Sea Scrolls were formerly part of the Jerusalem library.
So at the Museum of the Bible, they have some fragments, Dead Sea Scrolls. They're researching the authenticity of some of these, but these scrolls are significant. I've been into the Shrine of the Book. I've seen Dead Sea Scrolls. They're sometimes on tour through the United States, and people need to go and see these because of the significance. There's an interesting story behind the finding of these scrolls, and I think the timing, again, we're going back to timing.
Absolutely.
I don't think that was an accident.
Right, absolutely. No, these were found on the eve of the United Nations voting, the General Assembly voting to recognize the partition plan and to recognize Israel. And so it was a celebration when the first Hebrew scholar, Eliezer Sukenik, was looking at the very first Dead Sea Scroll. He was unfurling it on, his kitchen table, and he hears celebrations going on outside of his window. And it was Israelis celebrating this momentous occasion. And so he writes in his diary that night, which still just gives me chill bumps to read, but my eyes are looking at something that no Jewish eyes have seen for 2,000 years, because that very first scroll he was able to look at was called the Thanksgiving Scroll. And so it's not one of the biblical manuscripts. It was a Jewish text that had been lost for 2,000 years. Just so amazing to be able to reconnect with ancient Israel and modern Israel at that same time and at that same moment. And how these scrolls were hidden away in caves around the Dead Sea for that long a period is its own miracle.
And not being found in all these centuries. We're talking several thousand years they sat without anyone realizing they were there. The story is the Bedouin goat herder throws a rock into a cave, hears a clank.
Right.
Is that right?
And it was the shattering of a scroll jar.
And this is in 47, I believe.
47.
Yeah.
And so he didn't go in right away. He thought about it for a little while and went back the next day with his cousins. His name was Muhammad the Wolf. And he went back with some other tribesmen and cousins of his to retrieve what he anticipated to be treasure. I mean, he had heard shattering, and so it kind of, he went forward with that and thinking of there's something special in this grave. So he was disappointed whenever he pulls out of these scroll jars, the way a Dead Sea Scroll looks after 2,000 years. I mean, they were pretty blackened to leather. And so he brought him back to his camp, and there was a discussion about whether or not they should repurpose the leather.
So make sandals out of them or something.
Exactly.
Can you even imagine that happening?
No. So really, they just held on to them, not knowing what to do with them. They were illiterate in Arabic, much less this ancient Hebrew tongue that they would have been totally unfamiliar with. So none of that had any tip off to them in terms of that they were holding on to something sacred and wonderful.
And obviously one of them said, well, there might be some value with an antiquity dealer, and there were plenty of those in that day.
Absolutely.
And so it went to, I believe, Bethlehem.
Right.
And then Eliezer Sukenik got a hold of them. Literally, was on a bus. It was a turbulent time. The British were about to pull out. Yeah, and there were bullets flying. I mean, this was risky what he did. He was able to get, I think, 3 of them. And as you said, open them up, his eyes looking upon something that no one has seen for 2,000 years. as the nation is being reborn.
And the Hebrew tongue being reborn. I mean, all of that, just like miracle upon miracle.
And no time in history has a people that was gone out of a land has ever returned and reformed, and the language being dead too, being resurrected. God had predicted that he would preserve two things. One, his people, his earthly people, the Jewish people. He also predicted that he would preserve his word. So this bridge, 1,000 years or so? Between our oldest previous Hebrew manuscripts and the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Which you don't have many times in history that you get to move the needle backwards that much. By 1,000 years, these, more than the previously known Hebrew manuscripts predate. And so really, that's to me what's so exciting about archaeology as well, is that it's a science of unpredictability. So that was where things were going. Biblical criticism was making gains, analyzing the different authorship of the Bible, analyzing what had been changed, what had been inserted later. And so by finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, it just flipped it all on its head. It silenced many scholars, you know, the work that they had been doing for decades to minimize the Bible and its authenticity, this silenced within 2 years. In the Dead Sea Scroll collection, every book of the Hebrew Bible is represented in the Dead Sea Scroll collection except for Esther. So the idea, a lot of people think that the Dead Sea Scrolls were a Geniza, you know, for Jewish people, if you have the holy name of God, Yud He Vav He, written on anything, so whether or not it was a priestly vestment or a manuscript, and it becomes damaged or it becomes that they can't use it, you're not allowed to throw that away because it has the holy name of God. One theory is that this was just the Essenes library, the Essenes who lived at Qumran, that this was their own personal library, although it seems like a very large library for just one sect, and so that's why people have trouble with that theory. It could also have been a Geniza, that these were retired manuscripts that had become damaged in one way, in some way, and they had to properly store them. That is why a lot of people think, you know, the Book of Esther doesn't have Yud He Vav He in it. And so that's where the Geniza theory finds a lot of its foundation.
And that would make more sense, I think, because of the amount of scrolls that they found. The Copper Scroll begins with what people used to think was the first location, but Jim said, no, this is kind of the preamble of all the locations, which is the Valley of Achor.
Under the ruins in the Valley of Achor, that's how it starts. And then so it'll proceed into the first location. But you're exactly right. Other Copper Scroll scholars had said, well, this is the beginning of the first location in the 60 locations that'll follow. And exactly, Jim saw that just immediately as under the ruins in the Valley of Achor. Because there are other ruins in the Valley of Achor, and that was what Jim was open to. He did think it was the preamble.
And Shelley, if true, and it is in Qumran and it's found, it is the greatest find ever of really any type of find, treasure or not, archaeologically significant to a people, to a land, you know, to reconnect them to their history, to God.
Right. And when you look at modern Israel's history, so the Dead Sea Scrolls are found on the eve of modern Israel's rebirth. And I think for anyone watching God's Hand in Israel now, we all see that God's about to do something new. The American embassy is moving to Jerusalem. Other countries, especially with Christian leaders, may be following suit. And so we feel like we may be on the verge of Israel's next chapter. So if in 1948, its birthday gift is to be able to be reunited with its ancient scrolls, with the Hebrew scrolls, which is the gift that the Jewish people have given to the world. It's the thing that they're the most known for. So how much more so, in my imagination, at least in terms of how God might be working, is at this moment in history for her to be reunited with the things that once belonged to the Jewish temple, which we don't have. We don't have any real relics from the interior of the Jewish temple. We have artifacts from the exterior of the temple, but nothing from the ritual sacrificial system or the temple vessels. We have forgeries in the past, we've had fakes, but nothing that we can hold up and say, these are priestly vestments, these are temple vessels that were once used in the rituals.
This is different. Still found in the Qumran caves, the third cave, the 15th document that was found in kind of at the very last day, I understand, by the French
very last day and the very last hours. They were wrapping up the dig. Cave 3 had once had 40 scrolls in it. By the time, 2,000 years later, this archaeological team is excavating there's about 15 scrolls left, and all in a pretty dilapidated state. And so it was a disappointing excavation in that way. They could see that it was once a robust Dead Sea Scroll library, but it was the roof of the cave that had collapsed in antiquity. And so really a lot of scroll fragments were in rat's nest or were littered outside the cave's entrance. And so they were wrapping up the excavation. And, we say caves, but a lot of these are more like cave complexes, with side chambers, or in the example of Cave 4, the cave that had the most Dead Sea Scrolls, it's really 2 caves in one. So with the Copper Scroll, they see what looks like a small side chamber, but even in front of that side chamber was something that they had to chip through, a barrier that they had to chip through. So the way I think of it in my most active imagination is this was a false wall hiding, this secret chamber in this cave complex, and resting on a ledge, which looks like a man-made ledge, were the Copper Scrolls.
The only scrolls that were found that were written on metal, the rest on parchment, papyrus, that's significant as well. And there's not many, if any, other documents in antiquity that were written on metal. Is that right?
Right. We don't have any other examples of an inventory like this, but much less something written on copper in this way. We know that it existed from Egypt and from Greece, that this could have been a way to make a temple inventory, but certainly from Israel, we don't have anything like the Copper Scroll.
So this was found almost miraculously, and as a pastor, I'm always looking for that in the story too, is God is alive, God is at work, He has a plan. Sometimes the plan is timing. So this was found in 52. It was unrolled, cut open some years later. One of the team that was studying all of the Dead Sea Scrolls was very interested in this, kind of had that treasure hunter mentality, John Allegro.
Right.
And so he was able to get someone to open this, Henry Wright Baker, and he had to kind of jerry-rig a little bit of a device to cut it.
Right. He borrowed materials from the School of Dentistry, the College of Engineering, retired World War II materials. And so, yes, he made a contraption that still kind of makes me feel unsettled to look at pictures of it now. And he talks about in his diary that it would jump on the spindle every time it would make a full rotation. But it was genius what he did in terms of no one else could figure out how to actually unroll the scroll. They talked to people at Johns Hopkins, they talked to other metallurgists and specialists, and really no one could figure out, without great risk to the actual scroll, how to unroll it. That would have been the first choice. I think we could actually do that today, but at that point in time, it was decided to cut it into strips, which still made it so that we could read it. It really didn't lose any of the content in that process.
But even then, I don't think he really believed 100% that this is going to work. And wasn't it supposed to be the next day?
Yes, so Henry Wright Baker is a man of faith, which I feel like is very critical if you're going to take on something like this. And so, yes, John Allegro and him had an idea to meet the next day to make the first cut, because really it was with the first cut that you would know whether or not you would destroy it or be able to slice it into strips. And so they had agreed to meet the next day, and Henry Wright Baker made the first cut that night, and he wrote in his diary that exact thing. He wrote, that if he had shattered this 2,000-year-old manuscript, he wanted to be alone in his misery. So when John Allegro showed up the next day, and really the Copper Scroll was under his custodianship. He was the one that championed it. He was the one that asked the Jordanian Department of Antiquities to be able to bring it to London, to be able to see if anyone could cut it. So had it shattered, it would have been on him as much as the professor, but it worked.
Well, he took quite a step, or maybe a leap of faith.
Right.
Because of that, they were able to start to find out what did it say and translate. Now, even the translation was tedious. It took a while because they had all these other things to worry about. This isn't biblical. It is really even dealing with the way of living there in Qumran. But obviously, this is going to draw people's attention because of what it is, and talking about gold and silver and other precious items.
Although I will say that when the news first broke about the Copper Scroll, it was kind of your first piece of fake news in a way. The New York Times advertised it as saying, it really belittled it, almost making it look like just a piece of folklore. So the breaking article in the New York Times said this looks like something written in the light of the moon and blood and Treasure Island. And so by belittling it that way from the very beginning made it seem like an inauthentic document. So there wasn't this rush of excitement right in the beginning like you would expect, at least not from the public, and not till it was translated, which would take years for it to be translated and published for the public. So in the beginning, there wasn't this huge outcry of excitement like you would expect.
And that's kind of part of the curiosity of this whole story is, why has it taken so long to really get the ball rolling? And even now, even though Jim Barfield believes that he has located the exact locations and has scans to back that up, there's still this hesitation. And maybe it's because this was looked at kind of as a dream and it's not really true from the beginning, and it's just taking a long time.
Right. In its own way, the Copper Scroll has archaeologists almost don't touch it because of the stigma attached to it.
And there's a stigma attached to it.
You could be a Copper Scroll treasure hunter and not an archaeologist.
And that's what the one word that even the archaeologists that I know, they always will say, I'm not a treasure hunter.
Right.
Well, I think archaeology is treasure hunting. We're looking for treasures, maybe not gold and silver, but we're looking for, inscriptions that can connect to history or authenticate scripture or whatever. I think it's all treasure. So
Absolutely.
I think they really are, but there's certainly a stigma.
And none more so than if you say you're looking for Copper Scroll treasure. You can stay in a period of denial with other excavations, but if you say that you're looking for Copper Scroll treasure, that's as far as you can get on the spectrum of that fine line that they're always having to walk between. There's a hope and a faith attached to biblical archaeology that maybe professional and secular archaeologists want to deny, but in terms of the public that's consuming this information and excited about this information, we want it to be associated with the Bible. We won't want them to deny those connections.
Significant, interesting, exciting, all wrapped together, and you get to write a book about it.
The hope infected me. The hope that I kept seeing the Copper Scroll touch others and infect others, it happened in my own life that way. And the prayer that's always in my head, even just thinking about the Copper Scroll and the potential for it, is always just for God to shake the faith of unbelievers. For Jews, for Christians, for something this momentous and this huge. If the Dead Sea Scrolls didn't do it, maybe this will. And and a lot of that happens in terms of we don't see many pro-Israel Christians in the next generation, that Zionism is starting to fade, whereas people that were alive during 1967 or saw this beautiful nation built on the ashes of the Holocaust, that seemed clear that was God's hand. But if you're not a historical witness to that, you have a little bit more distance. So I feel like it's time for something new. I feel like it's time for this divine interjection, really. And we never say, Jim Barfield never says, the book never claims that these things will be found, that God told him this was there. I'm always very hesitant of things like that. But it's always just the hope and the potential that it could be, and for the Bible to be proven true, for the historicity of the Bible to be laid out for all the world to see. I mean, that's the thing that excites me the most.
So you ran into a lot of people that were different. You have academics that you were working with, archaeologists, which are academics, but they love to get their hands dirty. And then you have just some conspiracy people, some con men. I mean, you had everything kind of mixed into this story that surrounds this unusual artifact called the Copper Scroll.
Well, one thing that was important to me, I lived and studied in Israel for a few years with my husband in graduate school. And so to me, just the modern nation state of Israel, as Christians, even when I moved to Israel, I kind of imagined that we would be jogging around the Sea of Galilee. I imagined Jerusalem not having traffic or, congested bus situations. And so I really wanted a reader to be able to, even someone who hadn't been to Israel, to be able to walk in that world of both ancient Israel, but also modern Israel. So when I say things like Jim Barfield needed a piece of equipment from Ace Hardware, or, that he would stop and have coffee at this certain place, just all of that scenery and that background was important to me to convey that Israel is this real living and breathing and thriving place. And so it's not just the place of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not just the place where the prophets were born and ministered, but that it's an alive and well place now with its own complications. And I want all of that to bleed through as well, but with just so much promise and so much miraculous events being orchestrated that I feel like it's like we get to trace the hand of God at work in the world.
This is a difficult document to produce because you have to produce it backwards. And you can see some spacing mistakes, different writing from different people. So there's a lot that this tells us. Let's say it isn't a treasure or there isn't a treasure, but this is a very significant document in and of itself.
And it just oozes authenticity because of what you just said. There's 30 mistakes in the Copper Scroll, scribal mistakes. Their words get squished together. The writer seems rushed at some point. There's spelling mistakes. To me, that just confirms its authenticity. And not just to me, to most Dead Sea Scroll scholars, this is the one scroll that you see less debate on than the other ones. It's the most mysterious. But in terms of what the Copper Scroll is, all Dead Sea Scroll scholars at this point believe that this was an authentic document that was connected to real treasure at some point. Otherwise, the Copper Scroll has no purpose. It has no reason for using an expensive material, doing it the way that you would have to etch it in, which is a very laborious practice. It has no narrative. It has no literary value. There's no hero written into the Copper Scroll. So even if it was, a prop for folklore, which some Copper Scrolls critics in the very beginning thought it might be, it doesn't make sense because it's not celebrating anyone. It's not even looking back.
There's no author name on it.
The Copper Scroll always follows a certain format. It'll tell you where to look, the general location, and then a specific location, and then how deep to dig and what you'll find. And so it's that formula over and over again for almost 60 locations. And so it's not an exciting read in that way. I mean, most scroll scholars would tell you the Copper Scroll by itself is very boring. It's like reading an old grocery list or an old inventory. It's the potential of what the Copper Scroll points to that's amazing. And if you're just mathematically adding everything up while you're going through the scroll, I mean, we're talking about tons of gold, silver, and bronze, tons of precious metals that this is pointing to. So it's the grand sum, it's the potential for the holy items that it's pointing to. That's what makes the Copper Scroll so thrilling, not the actual text itself. Some words in the Copper Scroll are just transliterations of actual Greek words. So the word peristyle, transliterated, that's a Greek word, but it's transliterated with Hebrew letters in the Copper Scroll, which is very unique. You don't find those kind of things in the Bible. You don't find those kind of things in the Isaiah Scroll. Where the Copper Scroll is so different, Hebrew is a language very familiar to people. Ancient Hebrew, because we have so many texts, so many documents, because we have the Bible, we can find something from 2,000 years ago and a Hebrew speaker can decipher it. Right. The Copper Scroll, though, is so different because this is not a biblical text. They are using words that we don't have in the Bible. So up until the reinvention of Hebrew, up until modern times, we could tell you what the throne of God looked like and what it looked like for God to be riding on the clouds in Hebrew. You couldn't find the Hebrew words to tell someone how to dig a ditch, how to do something structurally. And so the Copper Scroll brings in those kind of words. And so that's why a lot of the words, and that's why some of the translations, why there is a broad variance, because these words, a lot of them were totally unfamiliar to us because they don't appear in the Bible. They don't appear in those kind of texts. This is a very practical Hebrew language. And they mix it up. Sometimes it'll be cursive letters, and sometimes it'll be the formal block letters. But the scribe will make mistakes in that way. One theory that's my favorite is that it was, and I could go on and on, but is that it was written by an illiterate coppersmith. So just this idea that whoever would have been able to touch these temple items would have had to have been priest, would have had to have been connected to the temple. Maybe they weren't necessarily great with inscribing copper. So they hire a coppersmith to be able to write the Copper Scroll, but he's illiterate, so he makes 30 mistakes in that process. But what that ensures is that he won't be able to go back in the future and dig up the treasure that he documented.
That sounds very logical to me.
Right?
It really does.
Or it's just, if you're not a scribe, if you're not a professional at this, you're gonna accidentally mix up a nun for a resh. And if you're in a hurry, so if the Romans are knocking at the gate, if the Babylonians are knocking at the gate, and they have a very short amount of time to hide this temple treasure, it's going to be a rushed document like this. This isn't something that they had time to perfect.
Jim Barfield looked at the Copper Scroll differently than other people, and he started to just piece it together one at a time, and he found places right there under the noses, right where the scroll was found, in the community that people attribute to hiding the scrolls, right there, all this stuff being buried. How could that have been missed? How could no one have thought of that?
Right, so this is the question that has haunted me as well. I've read through every excavation that's ever happened at Qumran, and I was looking for this. Is there any hint of treasure buried at Qumran? Maybe even they accidentally came across a trove of silver. And so in one case, the answer is yes. There was a jar of buried Tyrian shekels, and those were the exact kind of shekels used in temple tithes. So we have at the entry of one of the buildings, it wasn't buried deep, it was buried closer to the surface, more like the rim of the jar was close to the surface. If you read the finds from Qumran, it'll say an unusual amount of coins were found at Qumran for a site that size. Well, if it's counting that jar, it's an enormous amount of coins. So that's possible that one scroll jar was connected to the Copper Scroll treasure. On the other side, archaeology as a practice digs down to the last level of habitation. And when you look at the Copper Scroll, they were burying these things that long ago to hide them.
So you're talking
it's way past the last level of
10,
habitation.
15 feet down or deeper.
Exactly. I mean, the Copper Scroll uses cubits, but if we translate that into feet, it could be 9 to 12 feet 2,000 years ago that they're saying to find these things. So they were burying them to hide them. And that's not archaeology, that's treasure hunting. So yes, there's been archaeological excavations around Qumran, but no, there hasn't been a treasure hunt at Qumran. So that's where there's a real miss. Also, one of the sites that Jim Barfield sees as the most important, a cave northwest of Qumran, that all of his research points to, that has never been excavated. He and his team had been a part of an excavation there in 2009 that was stopped short. And so he can tell you that for sure, that particular site, there's never been a thorough excavation of.
So to complicate things further is where Qumran is. In Israel, there's different areas in Israel that are kind of still disputed, and it's in one of those areas. So explain that.
So Qumran is part of what we call Area C, according to the Oslo Accords, which means that it's exactly that. It's a disputed territory. So should a peace process ever land a Palestinian state and a Jewish state as two separate states, Qumran, it would be up for negotiation in terms of which side of that border it would land on. I don't see Israel giving up Qumran. Israel is a sacred space to Israelis. That is the international law that it adheres to. And by international law, anything that comes out of the ground in a disputed territory is unclaimed, it's unresolved. And so even today, any digs that happen in Shiloh or in anywhere in Judea, Samaria, technically what they find there is not under the authority of the official Israel Antiquities Authority. That's for Israel proper. It's for a military administrative wing of that.
We're talking easily $1 billion, probably much more than that, and then the historical significance.
Right, and can you imagine if someone who didn't fear God, was able to figure out where the Copper Scroll locations are, and then to just brazenly go in and unearth these things. I mean, this needed to be someone who feared God. It needed to be someone with a mind to be able to dissect these. And what I always think too, it needed to be someone who happens to have an aerial map of Qumran in his home study.
That's the other thing.
After meeting Shelley and hearing more about the Copper Scroll, I knew we needed to go talk to Jim Barfield himself and ask him how he deciphered the mysterious clues that may lead to incredible temple treasures. I also wanted to study what the Bible said about the sin of Achan, the Valley of Achor, and the predictions of turning the valley of trouble into the door of hope.
So that Hosea 2 chapter is this yearning for saying, bring us back to the days of our youth. Bring us back to the time that we felt so close to you like in Egypt. And then it points to the Valley of Achor as a place of hope and of blessing and a place of really weeping reunion. And so it flips it on its side, which I love when the Bible gets binary like that in terms of that we will change this place from cursings to blessings. Isaiah also has a similar prophecy about the Valley of Achor. And just the very fact that it was treasure that, in the case of Achan, brought on the curses, that it was stolen treasure that brought on the curses that was associated with a pagan people. And now to be able to associate Achor with holy treasure. And the Copper Scroll uses those kind of words, that this is sacred treasure, that this is vessels of tithing. And to be able to put treasure in a positive association and to be able to rejoin God to his people.
Here at the Museum of the Bible, they have a Torah scribe, and this is Rabbi Adam, and he's agreed to write for us the scripture that we have in our English Bible, that's Hosea 2:15, that talks about the Valley of Achor as the Copper Scroll opens with the Valley of Achor being the door of hope. What an amazing story. A story of treasure, a story of the Jewish people, a story of God at work today. Do you know him? Have you received the free gift of eternal life that your Creator is offering to you? The Bible tells us that we have sinned. I think if we're honest, we will look and say, yes, we have sinned. We've fallen short of the glory of God. Our sin has to be dealt with because God is holy, God is pure. There is hope. Yes, we've messed up. The Valley of Achor is the valley of trouble. Because of sin, we have this baggage, this weight upon ourselves that is weighing us down. We have a wonderful God who is a God of hope and a God of salvation. See, he sent his only begotten Son, his name is Jesus, to die on a cross, but he rose again. And Jesus said, if you'll believe in me, you will not perish, but have everlasting life. Let me show you this. The Bible says you and me have sinned. This is sin and this is you and me. And this is God. He is holy. He is perfect. Our sin separates us from him. What are we going to do? Well, the Bible says because of our sins, we will be separated from God in eternity, in a place that he created for the devil, a place called hell. But God loves you so much that Jesus became sin for you on a cross. And by faith in Jesus, by trusting in him, watch what happens. We have everlasting life. That is real treasure. Walk through the door of hope found in the Valley of Achor.
On the next episode of The Copper Scroll, the search continues as Jim Scudder Jr. seeks answers to what could be the greatest discovery of our time.
Qumran had been attacked. Only 100 of them survived the attack, but those men fought hard enough that they saved Qumran. And what they saved was more than just a bunch of stones. Qumran housed a treasury.
I wonder if anybody was thinking what I was thinking while we watched this about this treasure. We'll see. So I just got a couple questions here. I think that's somewhat, I know to some people this would be boring, but then some of us, this is kind of cool and exciting because, hey, there could be something here that we could see here in these last days that could have some significance. So I got, here it says, what do you think of the comment by Shelley Neese that the Jews knew the Babylonians and that the Romans were coming? I know my grammar's not the best there, but I mean, she made that comment. I think they knew they were coming. I mean, this is quite a. Yeah. Well, for 70 AD, right?
Yeah, how many knew Jeremiah and something about the Babylonians.
Yeah. Right, and none of this is done secretly, I mean, they knew it was happening, so. That, you'd think that, hey, if they're coming to get us, we gotta do something about this treasure. Because this stuff was important to their religious life. So, second thing I hear, do you think God will allow archaeologists to find an artifact that will promote the authenticity of the Bible during the last days? I mean, yeah, I mean, really, I think God gives people all they can see to understand, and yet people still reject Him. I mean, Romans chapter 1 talks about how people have everything they can see as far as what goes on in this world and how the creation is made, and yet they still don't see it.
You're
And
seeing that daily. I
Yeah.
mean, Sodom and Gomorrah have been unearthed recently.
yeah,
Other place, Zor, that was in the past couple of years. I mean, there's a lot they're finding that promotes the authenticity
yeah.
freedom.
And there's a lot of people who believe that the ark will be found, so be interesting. Okay, here's the one that I was thinking of. This third question is my last question. In Ezekiel 38 verse 4, it says, God will put a hook in Gog to pull them down to Israel. And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth. Could an immense treasure be that hook?
I looked it up in the middle of the thing, 38:13. Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold?
Yeah, this could be it. I mean, seriously. I mean, Russia, I think, is going broke right now because everything going on, and you know, all the Arab countries are having no problem attacking Israel. So Russia gets pulled down there for treasure, plus they have the seaport and everything. It's just, it looks like this all fits into place.